When we're here. They carry back to Washington, D.C., across the United States, and to our international fora. So it is great to be back, great to see some familiar faces, and to get out into the countryside yesterday. It might be useful context if I take a few seconds and describe what my portfolio is, and to build on to some of the questions we may have later. So as Colleen mentioned, I'm the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security. In State Department talk, I'm the T family, and that covers the arms control, verification, and compliance. It covers international security and nonproliferation, and political military affairs, the foreign military sales, which we'll probably talk about today. But more importantly, the reason I'm here is to reaffirm the message of the President, the message of the Vice President, the message of Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Mattis, all the way down the line with the administration on what an important strategic partner Georgia is for the United States, will continue to be an important strategic partner. I talked to the group earlier today. We stand shoulder to shoulder, not only diplomatically, militarily, in our national strategies, economically, across all the tools. I had the great honor of serving with Georgian military forces in Afghanistan, and we'll probably talk about that today as well. I served in uniform for 28 years, and from 2009 to 2010 in Afghanistan, again, with the great soldiers of Georgia side by side. We've seen that relationship continue just last month with Noble Partner, just an incredible demonstration of our partnership, of our compatibility, of our shared lessons learned. And this is a path that Georgia has done in such a short amount of time. When you look at the video, and just in a few short 10 years, the progress and reform that the Georgian government has made, the path that we will work together forward, but it's important to reflect on the past, but more importantly, I think in this forum, to look towards the future. I'm going to keep my remarks very short because I want to give more time to our Q&A session. But again, it's a great honor. It's a great opportunity. I thank you for the invitation, and for all my Georgian friends here, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Defense Minister, I know you have a few words you want to say. In particular, give us your assessment of where Georgia's defense relationship lies with regard to the United States and NATO, and perhaps overall as well.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. First of all, I want to convey some concrete messages, and after that, of course, we will discuss our strategic relationship. When we speak about global security context, in my opinion, U.S. national security strategy most adequately acknowledges the current global security environment. According to the strategy, we are living in a competitive world where the democratic free world, the West, is confronted by the authoritarian regimes. With regard to Europe, the authoritarian Russia is a substantial threat to the European community, which with its revanchist policies occupied 20% of Georgia and then annexed Crimea. Moscow is trying to break the unity of the West by weakening its democratic institutions. Georgia is an integral part of the West, which guarantees Georgia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Through democratic development, Georgia's aim is to become a member of NATO, EU, and a strategic regional ally of the US. Today, our aim should be preserving and strengthening the West. Only by doing so, we can deter Russian aggression. The US rightly recognizes the issue and as a solution puts forward the notion of strategic preservation. To my way of thinking, this translates into the importance of unity of NATO and EU. As for the strengthening of the West in a competitive world, the cornerstone for defending our common values must be the strength of our military. In my opinion, strategic preservation through renovation, first of all, means the renovation of the defense policy of NATO, NATO member and partner states, process in which leadership of the United States and strengthening military cooperation and defense capabilities of allies and partners is of utmost importance. In my opinion, for European Union, this translates into European strategic autonomy, which entails a higher set of responsibilities from the European countries in the field of defense to preserve NATO as the cornerstone of the European security. As for Georgia, which is on the front line of the direct threat of the Russian authoritarian regimes, the adequate response for the Georgian government is to preserve and strengthen its efforts towards the integration in NATO, EU, and the West. This is the national self-realization process, not strategic patience, but strategic readiness. Through the lens of military perspective, the main aim of our strategic readiness is to develop our territorial self-defense and resilience capabilities, to enhance its interoperability with the alliance, and to be continuously ready for NATO membership. So we are doing a lot, and we're taking some concrete steps towards this integration, and so, of course, I'm ready to underline this again with questions.
Thank you, Andrea. You heard from the defense minister there a lot of focus on NATO, and you were here last year with Vice President Mike Pence, and during his visit to Georgia, he confirmed America stands with Georgia and that the United States, quote, strongly supports Georgia's aspirations to become a NATO member. Is this still U.S. policy?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, the Vice President noted it last year, and we've had multiple occasions when we affirmed that. But I think it's also important to note it's not only in word, but in deed, in action, and tangible and concrete symbols of our relationship, of our partnership. Again, because I have the defense minister here at my side, just last month, as we had trained out in the training areas, we exercise that, whether it's maritime security out in the Black Sea, as we work together to build the operations center, whether it's information exchange. The list goes on and on. There's many tangibles and many public affirmations of the success and the partnership between our two countries. It's not only the people to people, but it's also, again, diplomatically, economically, and we'll continue to build upon it. So the long answer to the short question, but it's an important answer. Absolutely, it's continue a priority for this administration.
How do you feel we can convince allies of that? Is there a role for the United States with regard to allies that perhaps might not be as forthcoming as the United States?
I think the actions reaffirmed in July at the summit, and our allies have reaffirmed that the importance of the NATO aspirations, the continued reform that's necessary in making those steps. And I think in dialogue that I've had here in country and that we've had in international forums, the allies support that as well.
Thank you. And Undersecretary Thompson has underscored some of the ways that Georgia has been such a significant partner. And just one of them, one of the top contributors to Resolute Support that's helping to train Afghan forces. Georgia was one of the largest non-NATO contributors to ISAF in Afghanistan. You were part of the peacekeeping force in Kosovo, exercises in the Black Sea. But that was then, and what about now? And is this commitment going to be at the same level of engagement in the future?
Of course, we are committed to NATO, to our strategic ally, the US, and we will continue our engagement in international missions in Afghanistan and in Central Africa in framework of European security. But I want to mention that we started this year for our territorial self-defense, a very important program. This is Georgian Defense Readiness Program. So with that, we will be ready to defend ourselves. And our aim is, as I mentioned, to be ready for NATO integration, and it will be very supportive on that path. So we prepared our soldiers in previous year for international missions more, and this is now complementary to that mission. So we started reforms with new strategies and new national plans, which envisage that Georgia must be one of the examples for comprehensive security strategy made by the US and underlined in Authorization Act, which means to help neighboring countries facing threat from Russia, and especially focusing on territorial defense. And Georgia could be one of the good examples because we did a lot more rather than some other NATO countries. For example, during the last 2 years, we reduced, and this was very very difficult decision, but we made this decision, reduced personal cost in our budget. So we increased from 67 to 53%, and with that, allocated money on readiness equipment, and now we have 2% on defense budget from overall budget, and first time more than 20% on main acquisition. We received Javelin system from the US, and we now requested to receive air defense system Stinger. And why I describe all of these things, because for our preparation and for our, as I called, strategic readiness, is important not only to deliver some speeches or informations or theoretical minds. It is important military to strengthen ourselves. That's why I see reinforcement, and that's why I see strengthening of our unity. First of all, in military strengths, and Georgia did and do a lot of things with the US support, in framework of SNGP, from support of other NATO member countries, to develop these capabilities and to be ready every day for NATO membership. So, to summarize what I said, we did a lot, and we are ready, and we will continue our commitment, of course, to NATO in domestic issue as well as in international missions as well.
Very much. We'll now open it up to the audience. Where are the microphones? And our first question is here, and a second question here. Where do we have microphones? All right, then you get mine. Here you go. And introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Zvia Radzimbaya, recent graduate of the Fletcher School of Land Diplomacy. Your Excellencies, my question is brief. What are some 2-3 concrete steps that you think Georgia and the United States to take to advance their cooperation in the security field? Thank you.
So I heard a little rumble outside, but I want to make sure I have the question right. What are 3 steps that the U.S. and Georgia could work together to increase the national security? The security cooperation. Well, an example that we've taken that I would imagine we will take again, an example of a long-term strategic partnership is in our defense sales. Very candidly and selfishly, because I cover the foreign military sales and direct commercial sales for the State Department, that's an example of a long-term strategic partnership. So we've worked already for defensive equipment. We've worked with some of the excess defense equipment with the Coast Guard and providing boats for the Coast Guard to be able to use maritime security in the Black Sea, and we've had examples of that of late that will exercise that. So that's an example, is to build upon that as the next step in the defense equipment. I think another example is, again, what you've seen in the Black Sea and what we saw on the ground here in Noble Partner and in Agile Spirit, which I believe is still ongoing to exercise, is continued exercising between our respective nations. Whether it's bilaterally or whether it's within a NATO exercise, that is something else that we can build upon. Again, as an old soldier, you get better by training, and you get better by training with your partners. So the more often that we can get our troops together in the sea and the air, on the land, to exercise that increases our national security and our foundation for that. And then in the third area that increases with national security is continued reform. You've heard our president say that economic prosperity is tied to your national security. So it's continued reform, and we assist, but really Georgia has the lead for that. But as we assist as a partner on those reforms, that will also add to the national security. So those would be just 3 examples of many I could provide. Thank you.
So it was underlined in National Authorization Acts exactly 3 main issues, what is important for our relationship. This is to receive lethal equipment from the US. This is enhancement of our self-defense capability and territorial defense capability. And that's why I mentioned we are on the right path. We started this 2 years ago, and we will continue this. But I mentioned as well that we see our engagement as an important part of complex comprehensive security strategy delivered by this mentioned act, and that's why we want to share our experience with 11 or 12 countries which was mentioned in this act. There are countries, as I mentioned, facing threat coming from Russia, so neighboring nations, and we want to share our experience regarding total defense approach, which means that engagement of all agencies, all society is important as well. We share this with Baltic countries, with Scandinavian countries, and all of these steps described as important is seen as a whole comprehensive strategy, and we are ready to continue this.
Great, and I understand we have a microphone, so we'll have Ian first, and then what other questions? We have a microphone here, and we'll take 3 at a time. What's the third question? Another hand up, and here for the next microphone, so go ahead.
Okay.
Write it down, remember, okay?
Hi, I'm Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform in London. Undersecretary, I was glad to hear what you said about US commitment to the enlargement of NATO. But I'm very struck that Republican Senator Rand Paul, after meeting President Trump a few days ago, suggested that actually this should be something that we could trade with Russia, an agreement not to enlarge NATO to Ukraine and Georgia. And indeed, the president himself, after the NATO summit, seemed to call into question the commitment to the defense of NATO allies when he said that the Montenegrins were an aggressive people and they could land you in World War III. So I'm just wondering, where exactly do we stand on this? I know what the vice president has said. I know what Secretary Mattis and others have said. But who speaks for the administration on this? And perhaps a related question, as we see the Russians moving forward the barbed wire on the dividing line with South Ossetia, what messages is the US government giving to the Russian government about the consequences of continuing to take Georgian territory?
Thank you very much for the interesting conversation. Madam Secretary, I want to ask you, referring to the US national security strategy and also to the concept of the cooperation and competition, which is highly discussed within the international relationists, let's say so. Practically, how do you see the implication of this concept between Georgia and Russia by the different domains of the national power? Thank you.
Okay, that's our second and our third sphere.
Let me also join the words of thanks for the very interesting conversation. My name is Tamar Khulordava. I represent Parliament of Georgia from Georgian Dream. The topic of discussion is global security, and global security is very important, of course, to all of us. Georgia lies at a very important geopolitical place. I believe, and I think you will agree with me, that peace and security in this region is very much linked with the peace and security in Europe, on European continent as such. U.S. has vital interest in ensuring peace and security, at least that is how it is and how we see it. We've also seen that we have not evolved since 10 years in terms of promising Georgia NATO membership. And actually one of the arguments for not going one step or two steps ahead of that promise and statement was that we want to maintain stability and peace, and not to irritate or not to provoke further conflict. But what we've seen is with this decision, with protracting the decision of Georgia's NATO membership, we have seen conflict in Georgia, we have seen conflict in Ukraine, which is still ongoing. Should we reconsider? What is it that we should reconsider? Is it Georgia's NATO membership that Georgia should reconsider? Or can U.S. be more precise and more pushy towards Western partners, other members of the alliance, in terms of demanding and pushing forward NATO enlargement for ensuring peace and stability in our region? Thank you.
Go ahead and start perhaps with Ian's provocative question.
The provocative three-part question or two-part question. So it's okay. The 3 questions is 6, but I welcome the opportunity to share my thoughts, and hopefully we'll get some great questions for our defense minister as well. So just to comment on that, you know, the administration has been consistent on the commitment to NATO and the commitment to the ironclad relationship of Article 5. The president's reaffirmed that. The vice president's reaffirmed it multiple times. Again, both Secretaries Pompeo and Mattis, down the line, both in defense and in the State Department, and candidly in the White House as well. So our commitment to NATO and the Article 5 commitment is ironclad. Has been the case and will continue to be the case, and we stand firm on that. So that, to answer, I think that answers the first question. There was a question about what are we doing with Russia, and we've talked about this in the bilets this morning, but we've had continued discussions on this, on how we work together on Russian aggression. We've both seen Russian aggression, some in different ways. From my portfolio, it's Russia not upholding their end of international agreements and multilateral treaties, whether it's the INF Treaty, whether it's Open Skies. So we work together, again, bilaterally in international fora, as Russia has a disregard to the commitments they made in that. What are we doing with Russia? You've seen the sanctions that U.S. has in place. You talked with Ukraine until they uphold their obligations under the Minsk agreement. We will continue to sanction Russia. So this administration's been very firm with Russia, both in our disciplined engagements and talks, and in our tough sanctions. And we look forward to continued engagement with Georgia on some lessons learned and best practices as we continue to push back on Russian aggression and Russians' decision to not uphold the agreements that they've made in international communities. Thank you.
I want to respond to some of those questions. We just really only have about 2 minutes, and I know you want strategic readiness over strategic patience, but will Georgia have the strategic patience as you await a future with NATO?
No, better to have strategic readiness, because this is active process in which we are trying to enhance our capabilities with your support. And regarding global security and regarding adequate response in competitive war to Russia's threats, it is important for us, everyone, with NATO allied countries and partner countries, first of all, to bolster neighboring country from Russia to respond to these threats. First of all, military, what we do with NATO and our strategic partner, US. First of all. Second, it's important to enhance our cooperation. That's why I mentioned to share information practices. NATO must as well make more emphasis on regional trainings. We will have next year such training in March. And of course, this cooperation must be delivered with same approaches, and total defense is, I think, right approach for that, which means involvement of all society. That's why we re-established conscript system. We are in the process to establish new reserve and mobilization system. During these 2 years, we increased number of countries which were involved in multinational exercises. We had excellent exercises, noble partner, agile spirit, and it will be increased. So we have ambitious to have more than 30 NATO and partner countries in 2 years. So with that approaches and with that thanks, Russia see our actions, not patience, and readiness that we are ready to deter threats.
On that positive note, thank you very much for being in conversation with us, and our audience thanks you as well.
Thank you.